If you've ever looked into ancient or medieval warfare, you know what the outside of a helmet looks like, whether it be polished bronze, steel, iron, or lacquered plates. But what about the inside of a helmet? What does it look like, and how does it function? Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we are talking about helmet liners. Now here I've got my very famous 15th century Italian kettle hat, and I think many of you have noticed that inside this helmet we've got what is called a liner. Now in this case this is a very popular one, I mean in reenactment, that is 4 different lobes that create a suspension system made of fabric inside my helmet. On this video we've got several questions. Did all medieval helmets have a liner? What about ancient Roman and ancient Greek helmets? Did those have liners? What did they do in the Far East? Did Japanese helmets have liners? And did they look anything like their European counterparts in terms of materials, shape and form? And last but not least, how does a liner work from a biomechanical standpoint in relation to a human's head and skull? Taking things one step at a time, most likely the first question that could come to mind is, but when was the first helmet liner ever created? Now that's not an easy question to answer, mostly because liners are of course made of organic materials which are biodegradable and they don't survive very easily in time. So it's not easy to pinpoint a specific exact date, but we of course can cross-reference 2 items of information. 1, let's have a look at the helmet liners that we do have as extant examples in the archaeological record. 2, let's talk about the nature of helmets in general. Generally speaking, we could say that a helmet is a defensive system designed with the intent of preserving the wearer's head, and it's usually made with hard materials which very much vary depending on the level of technological development of said culture, and also in general terms and the individual wealth of the owner in question. But logically speaking, I want to say that I wouldn't be surprised if we could easily pair the very first helmets created in history, whether they be made of bronze, gold, or even copper, with the idea of, gosh, putting something metallic and hard in direct contact with my head doesn't feel good, I don't like that, let's put something in between. So even though I can't necessarily prove it, I'd argue that the idea of, I need to put something in between this piece of metal and my head was something that humans figured out very early in their history. Having a liner inside your helmet doesn't only have to do with personal comfort. There is more to that. Proper helmet fit is dramatically important for maximizing head protection during an impact, and this is something that even the ancient had figured out very well. To the point that even the ancient Romans, as they were going through the Marian reforms, which meant that you stopped having levies and you began having professional soldiers that needed to be equipped with armor from the state, we know that they found a way to both mass produce but still individually tailor both armor and helmet for each soldier. You see, without anything in between the helmet and your head, the ability of this object to do what it's designed for will be severely compromised. And this doesn't only apply to medieval helmets, it also applies to modern helmets. Whether it be the helmets used by the military or whether it be motorcycle helmets, all helmets have to go through extremely complicated tests to try and make sure that, for example, the liner inside, which in, for example, modern motorcycle helmets would be a sort of foam, works properly and it's the correct thickness. And that's only to ensure that the head of a motorcyclist remains protected in the event of a possible accident that may not even happen. Even more so, helmets used during classical warfare and during medieval warfare, which were absolutely expected to be hit possibly several times by all sorts of war weapons, definitely would have needed some sort of liner inside, or at least something worn on top of your head to maximize efficacy and protection. But how so? Well, during the design and creation of modern-day liners, the following data is calculated. Maximum residual crush depth, residual crush volume of the helmet foam liners, impact energy on peak linear head acceleration, head injury criterion, impact force, maximum residual liner crush depth, residual liner crush depth and residual liner crush force. Linear regression models are then used to separately quantify the relationship between the response variables. Of course, ancient Romans, medieval people and ancient Greeks didn't have the same methodology that we do, and of course they didn't have the same scientific approach with the same nomenclature. Still, because of experiential knowledge, they were very familiar with the effects of specific weapons against specific types of helmets and the way they were constructed, and they of course knew what worked and what didn't, and they did a lot of experimentation, and all of this is in the ancient records. Okay, but now I would like to take a moment to mention the sponsor that made this video possible. It's an author, which is something that I really like doing, mentioning books on my channel. So the author in question is Nicholas Cato Strode, and he is a subscriber to this channel, which makes this even more endearing. The novel in question, divided into Book 1 and Book 2, is part of the Doombrass Cycle, Book 1 being Either Way, and Book 2 being Killing Corona. Now, when it comes to the setting of these books, it's a roughly medieval fantasy setting. This is really an incredible concoction of all sorts of settings blended together in a very masterful way. In the sense that you have medieval fantasy, you have steampunk, you have alien races. Gustav, the main character, is a peasant farmer, and he's wrapped up in an adventure with a golem and 2 lizard men. He eventually learns about his own authority and autonomy, gaining magical powers as he strives to save the world from a primordial evil. The core message of the book, which is presented in a very creative and entertaining way, is the idea that we're all more free and in control of our lives than we might realize. You probably notice that I don't do many book reviews, and that is because I need to read the books. One thing that I really like about the way he writes is the fact that these books, I really like the fact that this is a very family-friendly novel, in the sense that, yes, it's epic, but it's not too dark and it's not too violent, but it's also great as a family activity. You can read it with your entire family. So make sure to click the link in the description and get your own copies of this really cool fantasy novel. And thank you so much, Nicholas, for sponsoring my channel. In this section, I would like to have a look and examine some of the actual medieval liners that are available in the archaeological record with you. And through this, I hope to be able to achieve 2 things. Number 1, I want to show you that there are different possible configurations and setups. 2, I want to stress the fact that a liner isn't just there for padding. I think we have heard this idea of you need padding under your armor, under your helmet, so much that we are starting to shift the focus of what a liner does entirely into padding. But one thing that I'm absolutely adamant about is the fact that a liner doesn't just pad. It suspends, and part of that extra protection that it grants comes because of the vacuum and the distance that it creates between your head and the top of the helmet, which is one of the reasons why you don't need extremely thick padding, and it was not used and it's not historical. Let me explain. According to the sources we have, helmet liners are usually made of quilted textile and tend to be stuffed, usually with horse hair, although the stuffing material can vary. Liners are attached to suspend the head inside the helmet. We have continuous liners, so basically made of one single element, and adjustable liners, which are normally made of 4 lobes or 8 lobes. The difference between a continuous liner and an adjustable liner is that an adjustable liner allows for more versatility. Because of the eyelet and cord at the top of it, you can open and close it to increase or decrease the space between your head and the top of the helmet. In any case, with a liner present, the head will not make direct contact with the steel of the skull of the helmet. Now this is critical, because usually the space that we create between the top of the helmet, so the actual steel, and the liner is a void. So for visual referencing, we could say that your head inside a lined helmet floats. This is called a suspension method, and it's how protection is achieved in medieval helmets. The padding is only secondary. How is that so? Well, first of all, the helmet is clearly larger than the head that it's trying to protect. Therefore, the force of any impact is distributed over a larger surface area. Now, if the helmet was fully and completely filled with thick padding, this would mean that once struck, that helmet would be rigidly coupled with the head. So, the helmet moves back, the entire head moves back. This could lead to spine injuries, it can lead to concussions, traumatic brain injuries. But if your head is suspended and it's floating inside the helmet system, once the helmet is struck, it is then allowed to move and disperse the force rather than focusing it entirely into your spine. Now, as you can see, liners were also used in bevers, and complete liners that also surround the entirety of the face existed. And I have a reproduction of one of these in my frogmouth. A frogmouth helmet is sort of a particular case because of how massive some of these are and the whole way they are created and the way they work. I will talk more about how sometimes frogmouth helmets are suspended and other times they are bolted, so there are different ways on a dedicated video which will be called Frogmouth vs. Armet that I will be publishing on this channel very soon. Now let's go to the other side of the world. Here we've got a Japanese kabuto helmet, usually used by the samurai class, but not exclusively. Now these helmets also have, historically speaking, a liner, and in Japanese it's called an ukebari. Ukebari were traditionally made of hemp or linen, and of course they would be maintained, replaced when needed. But one interesting piece of trivia that I think kind of surprised is that they would be often bathed in incense. The reason they would do that is so that they would always smell good and fresh. Now, what might be a little different from our perspective is the fact that a samurai would not only do that because they wanted to smell good for themselves or for the people around them, but also for their enemies, in the sense that because of how common it was for a samurai to decapitate his opponents so that they could take their head to their lords and show them so they could get reward, well, at least if your head smelled good, you wouldn't inconvenience them. Yeah. Similarly to the Western counterparts, the ukebari's job was of course to make the helmet more comfortable to wear. It also created a gap between the metal plating and the warrior's head. It absorbed sweat, kept the head cool, and helped absorbing the shock caused by strikes. Now when it comes to the ancient Romans, of course we have even less evidence to work with, mostly because we're going back an extra 1500 years. With that being said, we do have a little bit of evidence we can work with. And what we have seems to suggest that a form of woolen or possibly quilted linen padding was indeed used. Fragmentary pieces of leather were also found inside helmets, although it's possible that they were used for edging only. Now when it comes to medieval helmets, we do see the rivets that were used to connect the lining, but we don't see the same amount of rivets on Roman helmets. We do have some, but not as many. Either they used less rivets to connect the liner, or they used natural glues. In support of the second theory, residual resinous material was found inside Roman helmets, and applying hot water to them softened the material. So it was glue. Now a similar technique could be used by the Romans. Imagine that a liner got ruined and needed to be replaced. All you would really need to do would be to add hot water, soften the glue, remove it, replace it. Of course, an alternative means of padding could be to simply wear loose woolen or felted hats. And we know that when it comes to ancient Greek helmets, well, the Greeks did use felted hats. Although we also find small holes around the edge of some Greek helmets which might have been used to anchor a leather lining or some sort of fabric lining. And there are some Corinthian helmets that do display still remains of an inner lining. Now I have a theory, so hear me out. What if these little brass rivets that we have always considered to be just decoration, what if they're not? Look at where they are placed. In my opinion, they might be what was used specifically to connect a liner, both on the cheek plates, inside the helmet, and in the back. The way they are placed, it really seems to suggest that that's possible. Maybe that's what they were for. Another interesting fun fact is the connotation and combination of long hair and many warriors throughout time. And I've made a dedicated video to this a long time ago, but I'd like to underline the fact that I don't think it's random that many warriors in the past, whether it be many medieval knights, whether it be the samurai who had very long hair, whether it be Spartan warriors who also tended to have long hair, I don't think it's random. Of course, oftentimes long hair in the past, together in combination with a warrior or nobility classes, is a social status symbol. It's there to show that you belong to a specific class. And even though when we talk about the actual nobles, the Merovingian kings, their hair can be long because they don't need to work the fields. They are noble, they can keep it, they can maintain it, they can make sure it looks good. So it sort of is distinctive of a specific class. But when it comes to warriors, like the samurai, like the Spartan, maybe one of the origins of that length could have to do with the fact that when you have very long hair and you pull it all up and then you wear your helmet with the liner inside, it creates more padding. An interesting thought to think about. Alright, noble ones, well thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you are not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Check out again the link in the description to order your own copies of the two books, Either Way and Killing Corona. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.